PI planning in regulated environments is brought to you by piplanning.io.
What does PI planning look like in a regulated environment? How can such a complex task be performed in order to be compliant and still being agile? We will find out while we are showcasing some examples of ASPICE compliant with PI planning. To satisfy compliance standards, organizations must demonstrate that their systems meet their intended purpose without causing harm. They must also have the objective evidence required to prove conformance to such standards. An organizational quality management system defines policies, processes, and procedures that ensure development activities and the outcomes comply with all regulated requirements. They provide artifacts required to prove it as well. One of the not so obvious things is that SAFe has already built in most of the hooks which are needed for compliance with such high assurance systems. One of the big misconceptions in agile and regulated environments is that it's so hard to understand that it's basically is almost impossible to describe. But what we find is a lot of times is that people are just going for a treasure hunt, and you shouldn't. They are looking for their information in various web pages, documentations, standard operating procedures, and so forth. What you really want them to do is to have one common place where you can find all your relevant information at the very right point in time, at your fingertips. What are the specific artifacts to be produced, which guidelines, practices, tools, and even a basic of the defined roles. If you have such a clean QMS in place, compliance gets much easier. What we almost can say to most practitioners in the endeavors of SAFe is, forget about compliance. What we really want is that you follow the defined processes. And if you do so, you will be automatically compliant. Some say, come on, how does such a thing look like? That is what I would like to show you. You need to have defined processes with clear roles, responsibilities, activities with outcomes, and defined deliverables. Possible practices are indicated. Also the tools and guidelines are at your fingertips. So let me show you here one picture of PI planning in applied SAFe. What we see in this picture is that for each major step of PI planning, we have activities and we know who is the responsible person for its deliverables and outcomes.
This episode of PI Planning in Regulated Environments is brought to you by piplanning.io, the leading platform for remote, hybrid, and on-site safe PI plannings. Integrated with your Jira, Rally, or Microsoft Azure DevOps, and enable your teams to collaborate in the most outstanding way possible. Back to the program.
What we are doing in PI planning is to gather all involved people together, and we are doing all the best together to think about what the problem is and how we can resolve it. For example, what are the top 10 features to be built? What's the business context? What's the vision? And how does the intentional architecture looks like? What are the important cornerstones we have to deal with? What are the dependencies to other systems, and so forth? If you take now some of the requirements of ASPICE, we immediately see that these are already a lot of things what ASPICE asks you to do as well. ASPICE wants to see that we establish a common understanding and that we define the scope of work. That's a statement of ASPICE. That's exactly what we are doing. Let's have a look at what ASPICE wants us to have. They want to have a feasible plan. They want to have trust. And remember, in PI planning, we are all together and we plan together. We even all together commit ourselves to such a plan, how good will such a plan be? In my experience, I guess I've never seen such a feasible plan as a plan out of PI planning. And if you do that with a good tool, it's even better. In Applied Safe, we have some optional mentions of tools. One of them is also the PI planning app, which is already built into Applied Safe. Another good example is the team breakouts. ASPICE wants that work has been estimated and that there is a feasible plan according to capacity. Sounds familiar to you? What are we doing in the team breakouts? You're estimating your stories. You put them together and you have a very good understanding of what you will do and what your feasibility looks like, because you talked with the architects, you talked with the other teams, and you can prove that you have followed this process by having a commitment. What do we else? We have PI objectives as a base for the predictability measure. And you know which features you want to implement in the next PI based on real business value. With these things in place, we have a very good standing, and if you have made it explicit, it will fulfill almost all of the regulated requirements. Because SAFE has the hooks for it already built in, and we just made it explicit.